let's focus on the incentive of corporations. What the closing government characterizes corporations as is like these malevolent actors that want to keep these hateful people on their platform because it gives them more attention and brings like attention to their platform. I reject this characterization, and Kate does as well, which we would say that social media doesn't want this negative attention from people like Nazis on Twitter because that gives them like a bad stance. To see a platform and like see that they're allowing all these negative things to happen is bad PR. We're confusing this concept of attention with like good attention. They don't just want any form of attention on the corporations in and of itself. At that point, we think social media then has an incentive to try to at least somewhat limit these people from being on their platforms because it gives them negative press and gives them negative looks. And they don't simply want to have a Nazi on it because like Twitter is going to get attention. I reject this characterization. Why do we know that that incentive analysis that I just gave you is true? Social media and the status quo already to a large extent is regulating these platforms, which means that we know that they genuinely don't want this content to be on their platform because they know it's bad for them. But then, like, what does this uniqueness then come to? Say you buy this idea that like regulation is good. The problem is there is no facility, like there's no increase of facilitization that like a corporation has that permits them to regulate social media more, right? Facebook isn't going to be able to engage with the millions and millions of people on the platform and suddenly be able to stop all these issues simply because you propose. The only argument we get is this concept of financial incentives, like incentivizing them to do so. We think financial incentives, however, already exist in the status quo because individuals backlash against these platforms. They get called into Congress talking about things like fake news and get bad press when they're doing bad things. So we think they already have negative incentive structures that already exist. We don't think suddenly this is going to really change. Before I go on, I'll take opening.
That press literally does not matter if companies will choose to advertise on my platform because I have more engagement, if more people are spending their internet on their MBs on my platform.
Yeah, to some extent, this is true. But the thing is, advertisers don't want their content to be associated with Nazis. Advertisers will likely pull their content away when they know that their content is going to be associated with something really, really bad. These people have financial incentives, but they also have PR to cover to make sure the corporations stay good. So of course, they don't want to have all this negative press on their content. So that's why they like regulate. For example, YouTube doesn't like when people swear in their videos because advertisers don't want to be associated with that content. And so YouTubers get demonetized for swearing. At that point, the incentive is to keep good press, to keep good coverage. We think that incentive causes self-regulation inherently, and that kind of like buys out a lot of this impact. But at the end of the day, I want to really engage with this concept of accountability. We think we got some analysis coming out of the opening opposition engaging with the realm of social media. But I really want to engage with the concept of what is the role of social media in society directly. We think it's important to understand that the purpose of social media in society is simply to be like a platform for individuals to freely speak. What do we think like comes with the role of social media? First, what do users consent to when they join a platform? They are aware that the information will not always be true. This is not only in the terms of conditions, like terms and conditions, it is also within like constant narrative, which is like, don't believe everything that you see on the internet. Meaning, a user, when they get on the platform, is fully aware that the content they might see there could either A, be to some extent harmful, or B, to some extent be dishonest. That means that there's already a level of consent of users to realize this content might be true. It is up to them to determine it. Second, we think social media is a public forum. It is not a centralized unit. It does not make active decisions to like choose what content comes on it. Whereas like a CNN might be able, a chief editor at CNN will be able to sign off on a paper and actually edit something that might be slanderous. Facebook doesn't have the capacity to sign off on every single post because it is a public forum. In the same way that if a restaurant has someone inside of it saying Donald Trump like won the election was rigged, and the restaurant's like, okay, well, you can still stay here because like we don't care, that's fair because the restaurant is a public forum. The restaurant played no role in dictating whether or not that content might be true. We think this is a unique distinction because it shows you that like the very nature of social media makes it excluded from the regulation that might exist. Third, social media is not an arbiter of truth. Their role is not to decide what fact or fiction actually is. That is like an external actor such as a court, an external actor such as the state, but not necessarily a social media corporation. That is especially true when you consider the fact that a lot of these corporations have a left-leaning perception that causes them to have like media bias, meaning the information that they might be regulating could very well actually skew to a different level, meaning they're incapable of being an arbiter of truth in those circumstances. Second of all, we think accountability of the individual who created this created this content doesn't get heard on the proposition. Proposition solely focuses on Facebook. So if John Smith comes up and says Muslims are the reason as to why Notre Dame caught on fire, Mark Zuckerberg is the one who gets held accountable, not John Smith. Meaning the individual who perpetrated the harmful offense doesn't gain any accountability on their side, solely the corporation. We don't think that's fair. The motion asks us to evaluate the idea of ethics and who deserves to be held responsible. The side proposition doesn't fully do that. Very proud to propose or oppose.
Great. I thank that speaker for those remarks. And now I call upon the government whip. Hear, hear.
Okay, just to check, am I audible?
Yep, very clearly.
Amazing. And my time will start in 3, 2, 1. Panel, today's debate is about analyzing, firstly, whether or not we think that social media platforms have the principled obligation, but more importantly, why we think it's actually crucial for the law to be upheld in all situations, right? I think this is going to be a pretty interesting way of looking at the round because most opposition teams that have spoken today seem to be talking essentially about why they think there's going to be some form of backlash or why they think it's bad for a social media company to be deciding what's fact or fiction. So I'll go through a couple things of clash and sort of characterize this round in terms of why we think our extension uniquely deals with essentially, firstly, the reasons, the moral obligations, and also the practical reasons for why we think it's really important that social media companies are held liable. So the first thing that I want to cover here then is what we hear directly coming out of the opposition extension. So essentially the major thing that we hear is look, Facebook shouldn't be the one to determine what's fact and what's fiction. That's not fair. It should be the law. Okay, a couple things here. Yes, it should be the law. That's why we want regulations for Facebook, so that Facebook also has a reason and incentive to uphold the law on their platform. Because they are a platform for which people can speak freely, they're unlikely, because they want money and they want, a platform that people are willing to use, they're unlikely to just shut down conservative news sources or conservative accounts. What's more likely to happen is they suddenly have a crystallization of what they need to achieve on their accounts, which is not political ideals and what people believe, but rather strictly illegal actions that we think is ultimately extremely fair, right? I completely accept that Facebook shouldn't be allowing illegal content. That's on them. They are literally a platform created for people to discuss things. Why should we be allowing illegal content? But secondly, okay, this idea of Facebook being able to discuss fact or fiction. So even if you don't buy the fact that Facebook can be reasonable and has a lot of people working on this to try and make sure that their platform is a platform people are willing to use and will only literally follow the law if there is a law created, we also want to say that a lot of times, because Facebook right now has a reason to somewhat regulate certain things, as they mentioned, because of the optics for their company, it's much more likely that within a system in which there is regulation, they're going to be following that regulation. They're scared of there being legal action around them. And I'll deal with some stuff that opening opposition brought up here as well. They're aware that they're not really up for legal action, that they'll probably end up doing the things that they necessarily have to. Why is this important? Our extension told you that ultimately in the world that we live in today, companies structure themselves, have specific algorithms to basically not protect against illegal content, right? This is not content that has a political idea, but rather strictly content that is against the law. And a lot of times we think for example, advertisement, whereas I as a credible company may not want to advertise and be associated with Nazis, Nazis will want to advertise. And that's pretty fair because under the world that exists today, you're unlikely to be held accountable for it. I'll take that POI from OO.
You currently get sued, under your side of the house, you get sued because of the presence of content, not the prevalence of it from your algorithm. Why do they actually change the algorithm when what matters is actually whether it's there or not, not whether or not people see it?
Right. Well, we think it's pretty important that they have, firstly, the ability to moderate. And since they have that ability, that they should be moderating for things not to be illegal. So yes, we think prevalence is an issue because of the impact it creates, but illegal content is the core issue. We would really prefer for there not to be illegal content on the platform. And at the moment, they don't have a reason to be stopping certain things. For example, in the Myanmar, in the genocide, Facebook has been literally credited with being the mechanism through which people organized themselves and started posting fake news about minorities and things like that. We think it's pretty important to understand here that Facebook's incentive structures don't really prevent against them trying to regulate these sorts of ideas. Okay, but let's talk specifically about backlash because we think that's where a lot of opposition case rests. Okay, here's like a couple things I want to bring up, right? Just because we think there will be backlash, like it is what it is. People who are in this current world trying to uphold populist ideals create a us versus them sort of mentality anyways. We would rather for their like actual illegal content to be regulated to a certain extent, so that they don't have the ability to post like certain directly false news and have like advertisements, for example, on Facebook that are literally going to be offensive, and like not offensive in a way that's like, oh, my political ideals are hurt, but offensive in the sense that like sometimes they'll literally post some like government official in Nigeria who's like running for president. They'll like make a fake video of him being like an extremist. Like those are the sorts of things that we want to regulate. And under the current world, there is no impetus for them to do so. Why do we think this can happen effectively then? We think this can happen effectively because we've seen previous proof of it, meaning that in certain European countries, for example, in Germany or England, when the government was like, oh no, you're doing illegal things on your platform, we should regulate you, Facebook or like Instagram or TikTok or anyone, especially Facebook in the past, has worked actively with the government because they're afraid of there being like too much regulation. But in the cases in which they've seen that like potential, or in cases in which there has been regulation, they were really easily able to hire hundreds of thousands of people to firstly change their algorithm, change their like advertisement structures, like play that whack-a-mole game and get rid of certain accounts and posts. And we've known that they're able to effectively do so without literally limiting like free speech, because we think a lot of times it's really important to recognize that these companies have a significant ability to recollect content, to get rid of certain content, to make sure that their algorithms are respecting laws and being legal. We think in those cases then that it's really important that they have the moral obligation to do so. So what of this points that like the people who post the things should be held accountable? Like, yes, we think this can exist under our world too. Like if someone is literally being doing something illegal, the government can regulate it. But in addition to that, we think that their content should be regulated by a company that's actually profiting off of what's being posted. So we think both of these things can exist. And it's extremely crucial then for social media companies to be responsible, because the law or whatever is going to be very unable to protect against a lot of illegal things that are happening on social media platforms if the social media companies themselves have no reason to protect against certain illegal content. Okay, so why do we win specifically over our opening half? Firstly, we gave you a really realistic characterization of what this round looks like. That means, firstly, we think that there's incentive structures such as advertisements, algorithms, etc., that can be easily changed by companies to make it so that their content, or specifically illegal content, cannot be proliferated easily on the platform. Secondly, we think because we changed the incentive structure of the company itself, in that we don't allow them to have certain illegal content on their platform, even though in the current day, they do have that ability and they're not really held liable for it. So we think under both of these grounds, we win over our opening half because we give a really realistic characterization, but secondly, that we give you a specific analysis of incentive structures. So very proud to be on Closing Government.
Great, I thank that speaker for those remarks. Now call the op whip to close out this debate. Hear, hear.
All right, am I audible?
Yep, very well.
Fantastic. On Closing Government, we believe that all other teams in this round have failed on two primary modes of thought. First, they've failed to engage in the effect of the model on the issues talked about by the government bench. And second, we think that they've failed to engage adequately on the principle, especially the government bench that never really touches any of our principled argumentation here at all. Now, let's move here first to talk about the effect of the model on the issues that's been talked about from the government bench. They've spent a large portion of their speeches talking about how bad these lies and social media on fake news is, how bad the content, the egregious content we get from Closing Government is on the effects of people who use these platforms. Here's where I think we see the failure of the model and of the proposition as a whole. They tell us all of these problems, but they don't really give us a manner in which to fix it. We don't see any argumentation on this from Opening Government, so we think they're out of this debate on those grounds alone. But in addition, when we look to Closing Government, the only mechanization they give us is this idea of the profit motive, that we tie more profit motive to catching these catching these bad actors, and thus these problems are magically going to go away. But the question that was never answered from the Closing Gov team is, at what point what are these platforms going to be doing more of under their side of the house? So, like, let's imagine a proposition world for a moment here. What more is Facebook going to do? They've told us that, like, this whack-a-moling of individual accounts is not working. But what is the alternative? They're still going to be using the same mechanisms to attempt to catch these bad actors. That is, they're still going to be attempting to use, like, siphoning through individual words that are being used in certain posts. So, like, what else is Facebook going to be engaging in? Hopefully, Closing will answer this question now as I take their POI.
We literally explained to you that one of the reasons why these posts become so prolific is because the algorithm is designed to favor them. That therefore, if we made it illegal for these companies to host or punish these companies for hosting such opinions, then the logical corollary is that they would focus on making the algorithm such that it doesn't make these posts so prolific.
I think this is a fundamental mischaracterization of the algorithm. The algorithm is just trying to show individuals content that they want to see, not content that is fundamentally bad for them. The issue is that these portions of content are often flagged in the same genre, i.e., this is how you get from a Ben Shapiro video to an ISIS beheading video. Like, this is not the intent of the algorithm. Instead, this is why the social media companies are attempting to do these sorts of things in the status quo. If they could do it, they would. They already have the profit motive to stop it from happening in the first place. So we have not gotten adequate argumentation here from Closing Government. Next, let's move on to the principle. We say that the government bench fails to engage on the principle at all, and then the argumentation we get from opening opposition is quite surface level and doesn't engage with the totality. Here's why the principle is vitally important for this debate. The motion asks a question of whether or not we should hold social media platforms with liability for illegal things posted on their platform. Fundamentally, this is a question of who takes responsibility. And when we're crafting policy around the justice system, we think that the principles that underlie that policy needs to come first when we're asking those questions. So fundamentally, on closing opposition, we tell you two ways in which social media platforms are not responsible for the posts that are made on their platform. We see this in two layers of analysis. First, we tell you that the role of social media is fundamentally divorced from this idea of liability. Darian gives you this analysis with the comparison between the editor at CNN and a social media platform. With all of these news corporations, there is an inherent idea by the people consuming that content that the information on that content is true. Compare this to the alternative of social media. In these cases, users are well aware of the fact that the information that you're getting is not accurate or is not necessarily accurate, and it's being posted by random individuals on the internet rather than, say, journalists who are trained to attempt to disseminate truthful information. What all of this goes to show you is that the liability here on a fundamental level should not exist at the hands of social media platforms, because it's just not their role in society. Their role is a public platform. If some celebrity were to engage in defamation at the Grammys, we wouldn't be suing the Grammys because they were the platform in which that defamation took place. We say the same principle should be applied to social media, and as a result, the entire motion should be opposed on those grounds alone. But we give you a second layer of principle analysis here that we think is just as important. This idea of individual accountability. This is fundamental to the justice system, that everyone should get their dues. Everyone should get their dues. We see that individual accountability is hurt under their side of the house because those people who are posting on social media are not the ones that are primarily held accountable. Why would anybody sue the individual posting when they can instead sue Facebook, which is much more likely to just settle on the issue and is going to just give the money away because they cannot fight thousands of court battles on defamation every single year. What we say here is that individual accountability, when we open this up to a third party, is damaged, because the third party is not the primary actor that should be being questioned here. Let's compare this finally to the argumentation on principle that we get from opening opposition and why we think that our content is stronger. They fundamentally give us this idea about how they give us how because there's no democratic mandate, these social media platforms are not the right organization to be engaging in this. We think this is good argumentation, but it doesn't address like fundamental, broader strokes ideas about like what the role of social media is fundamentally. Thus, we think on those grounds, our argumentation should be valued above. All teams in this round have failed to engage on the principle and have failed to give us the true effects of the model. For those reasons, we have never been prouder to oppose.
Great. I thank that speaker and all speakers for what was a fine debate. I invite all speakers to virtually shake hands and exit the room. We will now move to a breakout room and deliberate, and you will get your results in the Discord GA, presumably, when all is said and done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, we don't have to move to a breakout room. I think it's just us, right?
Oh, cool. I think we're streaming though at the moment. Yeah, we're live on YouTube right now, so they wanted to move to a breakout room.
Just turn off the stream now, right?
Yeah. Whoever's hosting the meeting, would you mind either moving us to a breakout room or stopping the YouTube stream? Okay, well, let's take a minute, look over our notes, and reconvene. If worst comes to worst, we can move to Discord.
Yeah, we could use one of the rooms.